going to give you a little taste of a film that has been made by Financial Times journalists, an investigative documentary that has found evidence that Russian executions of Ukrainian prisoners of war are not isolated incidents, but are likely to be part of a broader pattern that points to a systematic policy. And then we'll meet Christopher Miller, the FT's chief Ukraine correspondent, and who is currently in Kyiv. So here is a little clip from the film.
It's not a movie. It's human beings which have been killed.
Every military person knows that you shouldn't rely on international humanitarian law.
They normalize evil. We must break the circle of impunity to prevent the Russian attack to the next nation.
.54 is the time. Christopher Miller joins me now from Kyiv. What was the trail you followed here, Christopher? Where did the original impetus come from? The original suspicion, I suppose, that led to the investigation?
Sure. Well, I've been living and reporting in Ukraine since Russia, long before Russia's first invasion in 2014. I've been here 15 years now, and we've seen this pattern over, years. Russia flouting international law. I noticed at the end of Russia's, let's say around the end of the first year of Russia's full-scale invasion here in Ukraine, at the end of 2022, early 2023, that there seemed to be a spike in a number of cases being reported of Russian soldiers committing executions or summary executions on the battlefield of Ukrainian soldiers who had surrendered and were taken captive. And some of these videos were starting to come out and be published on Ukrainian and Russian social media. Some of them were published by Russian soldiers themselves. Some of them were captured on drone video by Ukrainians who were, watching what was happening on the battlefield and seeing their own men come out of trenches with their hands up, unarmed, and then be gunned down. There was one case in particular of a Ukrainian soldier named Oleksandr Matsievsky, and it became this real sort of rallying cry for Ukrainians. He was seen on video, shot by Russian soldiers, being disarmed, and then asked if he had any final words as he lit up a cigarette and he said "Glory to Ukraine" before he was shot right there on the spot. And since then, we've noticed a spike again in these cases that really started to gain pace over 2024. And so over the course of the last many months, myself and my colleagues at the Financial Times set out to figure out whether or not this was Russian policy. And what we believe we have found is evidence of dozens of cases of Russian soldiers committing acts of not only violence, but executions on the battlefield.
And is it simply a question of gravity? Is it simply that if it's happening so frequently and so often, then it becomes harder to resist the conclusion that it is official policy? Or have you established any form of instruction, any form of formal policy?
Sure. Well, there is that. We've seen an increase in it. However, we also traced this particular execution case of 6 Ukrainians to a specific Russian military unit and even to one specific soldier. So we traced the tracks of a Russian soldier by the name of Oleg Yakovlev, who is from the Saratov region of Russia. He is a former convict who was part of one of these storm units that the Russians form with convicted felons. And particularly, he was a part of the 30th Separate Guards Motor Rifle Brigade. And they were actually awarded by the Kremlin and President Vladimir Putin an award for their service and their heroism in battle.
That unit's been implicated in multiple war crimes, as you mentioned. What sanction is there? I mean, goodness knows, especially with the events of this week, goodness knows what the end game looks like or what the light at the end of the tunnel looks like. But what is the possibility, process, likelihood of any of these people facing any form of justice?
Yeah, that's a big question here. We have the evidence. We've built some strong cases. The Ukrainian prosecutors have dozens of cases with very strong evidence of this. But it is going to be very difficult to see justice for many of these crimes. There is only one case currently of a Russian soldier who has been apprehended. He was taken captive on the battlefield, and he is currently jailed in Ukraine here and on trial for the execution of a soldier. And he has said that he did not carry out this execution himself. The Ukrainians say otherwise, and they've presented evidence. But definitely one very difficult thing is going to be reaching out to actually apprehend any of these soldiers who have committed these crimes. And certainly one of the big challenges is going to be holding their military commanders and political leadership, even up to the Kremlin, and especially someone like Vladimir Putin, accountable for these crimes.
I tell people here how they can watch your film shortly, but before that, how much traction do these cases accrue in Ukraine? How involved and informed is the Ukrainian public of these kind of atrocities?
Unfortunately, very informed. They would prefer not to see these videos, but there are so many of them. I mean, it's almost a relentless barrage in and of itself, seeing these things come out. I mean, late last year, it was almost one or two every single week that we would see as the Russians made their advances on the eastern battlefields of Ukraine, that these videos would surface either on Ukrainian or Russian social media or be sent to soldiers who would then provide the evidence of these crimes via video to journalists like myself.
And finally, Christopher, while I have you, speaking of public opinion, public information in Ukraine, how have Donald Trump's lies about Volodymyr Zelenskyy been greeted and indeed reported?
It's really shocked Ukrainians. I think Ukrainians are under no illusions about who Donald Trump is and how emotional he is and his reactions publicly. They dealt with him certainly in 2019 when there was the famous phone call between him and Zelenskyy that led to his first impeachment in the U.S. House. However, they understand that America is their biggest and most important ally here. They've relied very heavily on American military assistance and political and diplomatic support. So to hear the words that are coming out of Donald Trump's mouth, and as you yourself mentioned, lies, this is shocking to them and deeply concerning at a moment that is really crucial. They need all the support they can get if negotiations are going to happen, and they're going to need the Americans on their side.
Christopher Miller, thank you. We'll talk again, I hope. The FT's chief Ukraine correspondent and author of The War Came to Us, Life and Death in Ukraine, speaking to us from Kyiv. You can find the film that we've been talking about on YouTube. It's called Film Me. Russia's executions of Ukrainian POWs point to a policy. It's a very, very detailed piece of work. I should add that the Kremlin and the Russian defense and foreign ministries did not respond to requests for comment from the Financial Times. In the past, Moscow has dismissed these sort of allegations of executions as propaganda, and its military commanders, Christopher told us, has even handed awards to soldiers accused by Kyiv of involvement in the killing of 4 Ukrainian prisoners of war. It's 1 minute after